this is my grandma, and we're going to be talking a little bit about just some of the history that you've lived through. So, first off, what year were you born? When was your birthday?
I was born in February 15th, 1932. It was pouring down rain the night I was born. And my father, we lived out on an unpaved road, and he had to ride out horseback to a neighboring town to get the doctor. And while he was away, two African American sisters who lived on our ranch delivered me.
Wow.
And I lived on that ranch until 1934, and we moved to Kaufman with a small acreage at the edge of the town where we built a home, and that's where I grew up because we had better schools. Because when we were in the country, all the kids out in the country rode horseback to it was a one-room schoolhouse, and my older sister rode a Shetland pony to the school. And there were several kids riding horses and to the school. And we moved to town to have better schools. And we lived there during the Depression. But we didn't suffer from the Depression because we had our own food. We had cattle, pigs, chickens, garden. And we canned a lot of food for the winter. We made our own clothes. And then during the war, my mother worked at the North American Aviation, where she built airplanes. She was a Rosie the Riveter.
Yeah.
And she also was very good at management because she was used to managing the help on our ranch. And we also had a farm where we had cotton and grew all kinds of crops. So she managed the people working for us. And they saw she had good management skills, so they sent her to school and trained her in reading blueprints and made her a supervisor.
Wow. So going back maybe to the Great Depression, I think that did you make like the little dresses out of the flour sacks?
Some people did. We actually didn't make them out of the flour sacks, but we made aprons and pillowcases. Nothing was thrown away.
Yeah. Do you have any other kind of memories from that period? I know you would have been really little, but just how maybe it affected friends or other families during that time?
Well, there were some. I know there was one. I had an uncle that was in Europe we didn't hear from for 2 years. He was in the Battle of the Bulge, and he went into Munich after the war, and we didn't hear from him. Finally we did, and ironically, speaking of Munich, one of my very best friends that I met at SMU and years later, she grew up in Munich during that time. And she was in a boarding school, and they took the children, I guess, I don't know if they were trained and indoctrinated in Hitler Youth, but she lived separate from her mother, and she said that when the Americans came in to Munich and bombed Munich, they could look down the hills and see the fires and the bombing, and they didn't know if their mothers were alive or not. So I got the same viewpoint, different viewpoint from someone on the other side of the war, and we became best friends after the war, and she told me her experiences. And as I was growing up at that same time, Mother was working, building airplanes, and my father worked there for some time, but he had to manage the ranch. So he didn't work there very long. And she, during that time in Kaufman, we had blackout drills, and the children did everything for the war effort we could. We collected scrap iron, and we even went into the pastures and got old cow bones and loaded them up and took them for the war effort.
Wow. Now I know your mom, so she worked helping to build planes, and didn't she actually get a piece in her eye?
When she was working riveting, at one point she got a piece of steel in her left eye.
Wow. That she always had a bad eye because her work for the war effort. That's amazing. Do you remember anything else? Like, do you remember what you were doing when you heard about Pearl Harbor or any of those kinds of big events during World War II?
I remember when we heard about it, and everybody was. Then we had radio. We didn't have TV.
Yeah.
And I remember everybody was just around the radio listening to all the news, and that it was a lot of, it was just a horrible thing. And there was a boy from Kaufman that was killed at Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
And then during the war, we had a prisoner of war camp, just like a few blocks from our house, where they had prisoners from Germany.
Oh wow! Wow. So you had them just right there where you were living.
And near our little town, there was probably 8 miles away, Terrell, Texas. They had a RAF training facility where they trained British pilots during the war.
Wow! Oh wow!
Because they couldn't do it in England because they were having the Blitz and the Germans were bombing at London, and they had to train over here.
Oh, I didn't know that. And they were close by too. Wow.
So, and it was, but it was a time that everybody was concerned, and we had rationing, gasoline rationing, even sugar. And speaking of my friend from Munich, Germany, she said they had sugar rationing too.
Oh wow! So even on the other side.
And I thought that she said that they would get sugar in the boarding school because they were trying to make the super German youth, so they got all the things that the ordinary public didn't. And she said that she and her roommates would hide sugar under their mattress. And then when their mothers would come to visit, they would sneak it to their mother.
Oh wow. So I guess the next thing to ask is, do you remember, like, at the end of the war, how did that kind of impact your family? Did your mom go back did she stop working at the factory?
No, after the war was over, people all got back to normal and things became better. And but another thing I might mention in the Depression, there were people that weren't as well off as we were. And there were bread lines and soup lines. And in Kaufman, we had what you called a poor farm. And it was at the edge of Kaufman, and it had a house where the manager lived, and there were bunks, and people could go there that were destitute and live at the poor farm. And they helped raise crops. It was a farm. And they were allowed to live there, and they had food to eat. It is still there.
Oh, wow.
And they're restoring it, and it's one of the few in the United States. I guess it still exists.
Wow.
And they're making a museum of it.
Oh wow, that's so neat.
It's called the Poor Farm.
Yeah, because that's where.
And we used to joke when we were kids and said, if you don't, do this, you're going to end up at the Poor Farm.
Oh. Wow.
But it was it was a neat little town when we were growing up there, and people worked together, and we made the best of it.
Yeah, even through those tough times.